So, POPGOES, what began only as a mere concept spawned from some dumb Five Nights at Freddy's 3 teaser, grew into, well, not just a fan game, rather a catalogue of ideas and potential. And while not all of the planned POPGOES content announced and developed over the years has ended up in a fully developed or playable state, the amount of work to get so many of these projects off the ground in the first place is commendable. The biggest playable projects have come out of all of this, of course, is POPGOES, the main attraction. As like I mentioned in my review of that game, despite some hang-ups over 4 years later, it still holds up. And yeah, there was some stuff about it that didn't sit too well with me, most notably some of the weirder animatronic designs and material choices, as well as the way the mechanics work with each other, or rather lack thereof. But other than that, it was quite a tightly wrapped piece of fan content with a lot to love about it, with a unique setup, variety in the mechanics, and an overall code of polish that outlines this, especially at the time of release, as a pretty big deal. And it's a hefty game for what it seems to offer at face value, around double the size of your typical FNAF. Unfortunately, any and all attempts at a POPGOES sequel were scrapped at some point along the line, some concepts hardly making it to the light of day, others well into development and fully planned for release, only to be canned due to several reasons, including pressure from the community and doubts over whether finishing such a huge project would have been worth it. But despite the games that never came to be, there's still a bit more fully playable POPGOES content to delve into. Prior to the release of POPGOES on April 1st of the same year, a playable teaser under the name POPGOES Arcade was released on POPGOES' Game Job page. Presented as a simplistic RPG, you'd play as POPGOES the Weasel himself, making your way through forest and castle to defeat King Cultivate. While a part of the original POPGOES canon, the game was actually released on the assumption that people believed that the main POPGOES fan game was about to drop. Except, well, no, it doubled as a punchline to an April Fool's joke. Oh guys, POPGOES is totally going to release April 1st. No, while that didn't end up happening, what we got instead was a short hour-long romp through an in-universe arcade game. And yeah, that's what I want to look at first, so here we go. POPGOES Arcade, the title is pretty self-explanatory. We're playing at an arcade machine in the POPGOES pizzeria, apparently one day before the events of POPGOES. And they really pushed the idea here, having us play the game projected on a 3D render of said arcade machine inside the restaurant. And to my knowledge, this is something I don't think had been done before this, so props, that's a nice level of detail. Even the little joysticks and buttons move in accordance to the key presses, that's rad as hell, dude. Well, okay, the entire game isn't presented this way for the short opening sequence anyway. We're introduced to POPGOES Arcade through a little introductory minigame where we control the puppets. You can make him struggle. Yeah, that's really all there is to it. Struggle as the puppet as some four-armed alien gets closer and closer towards you. But hey, here we go. The premise is pretty simple. You're thrown into Weasel World, as it's called, where you'll play as POPGOES, fighting potted plants, gathering pocket change, and getting real spooked. I'll get into all that in a bit. The game definitely has its spooky moments, but yeah, this is certainly the definition of a teaser game. It's under an hour long, consists of 2 fairly short areas, and for all you fans of clever and thought-provoking puns, you haven't been behaving very nicely. The game's plot is as standard as you can get, the gist of it being that it's time to take back this world. You need to help the other garden animals. It's clearly not meant to be taken very seriously, just something simple to give you a reason to go out and do the things you gotta do, and sometimes, you know, that's all you really need, especially for a game as straight to the point as this. Progression is incredibly straightforward. You'll collect coins by either simply walking up to them, just laying about in the overworld, or as a reward for defeating enemies, which can be spent on your attack power, max health, and purchasing healing items by interacting with Sun the Crow, the Squirrel Sisters, or Blake the Badger, dotted around the map. Wow, yeah, this really is as simple as you can possibly get with an RPG. No weapons, no buffs, even a concept as simple as separate consumables are absent, just a vague healing item to boot. The combat is ridiculously simple. Your 2 options are attack or heal. If you can't defeat an enemy, go a little further back in the game and farm a few easier foes to rack up coins to level yourself up. Oh, and farming enemies is kind of a joke. It got to a point where I realized you don't even need to walk around to trigger encounters. It'll just happen randomly. So if you've increased your attack and max health beyond a certain threshold, you can in fact just sit idle and spam the spacebar to win fights and generate coins. This might have just been an oversight, but yeah, that really is all there is to the gameplay here, aside from exploring your environment. Even that can get a tad tiresome too, though. You move fairly slowly, making hunting for secrets a little draining. But like I mentioned, the game does get a tad creepy at times. References to some of the more notable events in the POPGOES timeline appear as subtle, or sometimes not so subtle Easter eggs, but even with the context of that game, sometimes weird shit will happen with no explanation, or none that I could find. For example, I died and had to restart from a save point, which are these little 3D printers in accordance with POPGOES' focal mechanic of 3D printing robot parts. And I travelled downwards from this screen only to find the fountain here filled with blood. and surrounded by dead plants. This totally caught me off guard, with no music cue changes or anything, almost like it was unintentional. Another instance I can recall, albeit more of a direct reference, is when you're able to swipe 10 coins from this well, but if you keep inspecting and inspecting and inspecting, you'll find an axe floating in the water. It's non-equipable and merely a reference to a plot point in the timeline, but again, it's definitely not something I was expecting. But then you go and fight the sentient egg from One-Eyed Flumpty, so I don't know, checks out, huh? Yeah, pretty much every enemy here is based on a pun, usually on some pre-existing character of some kind. And just like Flumpty, or Dumpty, I guess, as he's called here, there are a few other Fangame characters here. Tester, a parody of Chester the Chimpanzee from Five Nights at Candy's, and Doug, a parody of, well, Doug from Those Nights at Rachel's. The flavor text you'll get for each counter is equally corny. You're simply being rude. I forgot the last time I had a good fight. You guys are such buzzkills. I want to go and play a game where the flavor text is anything but puns. So once you pass Egg Bitch, you'll be taken to the castle. No garden animals, as the floor reads. Again, it's very silly and tongue-in-cheek. The enemies you pass along the way to the king of the castle reinforce this too, telling you that you've taken too much and to turn back now. The ending is a little unsettling though. For context, in addition to the silly messages you'll get, some battle flavor text is occasionally a bit strange in tone. You're on your own. Did the others branch out? What have you been doing to our plans? Once you beat King Cultivate, he'll make it clear to you that with him gone, you'll starve, calling the animals evil before perishing. I can't help but imagine this is some kind of parallel to the POPGOES timeline. Something to do with the animatronics in the restaurant, maybe? I'm just spitballing. There is one other ending here though. Back at the beginning of the game, there's an inaccessible silver key behind a wall that you can't access fairly early on in the game, and on a regular run, likely won't be picked up. But hey, POPGOES really do be some kind of ghost phasing through walls and that. Yeah, there's a fake wall here, and by traversing left, you'll follow a linear path right back to that silver key, and you'll be able to use it to unlock the previously inaccessible silver gate. And once you do, you're able to enter the house locked right behind it. Going right takes you to whatever this is, but otherwise a totally dead end. You'll have to travel back to the entrance, follow an invisible path here, run through a collection of FNAF 3 secret minigames, and damn. Yeah, talk of unsettling moments. Aside from the visual novelty of having POPGOES Arcade visually surrounded by a physical arcade cabinet, as well as further pushing that suspension of disbelief, having that literal extra space to play around with gives the developer the perfect opportunity to set up moments like these. You become so accustomed as the player to focusing purely on the game in front of you that something as simple as a hand reaching out the game screen is really effective. That's the sort of stuff I love, and want to see more people in the Fangame community not be afraid to branch out into. Most FNAF fan content sucks in that regard. Jump scares are cheap and totally suck ass most of the time when it comes to genuine scares, which is why something like Squimpus McGrimpus' FNAF VHS series is so popular. It doesn't rely on cheap shock, rather cleverly takes these otherwise bloated and overplayed concepts and elements from the FNAF games and incorporates them into a setting that plays around with your expectations to create some legitimately scary scenarios. That kind of subtlety and horror goes a long way. One detail I found interesting about this thing though, if you quit out the game prior to reaching this secret ending, your parents came back, playtime is over, it is all that's read on screen, but quitting after the Black Rabbit ending, tonight his shift begins appears below that, indicating that this very well may be the canon ending to POPGOES Arcade, with the cracked toy bunny mask on the arcade screen indicating a certain canon story element that precedes the events of POPGOES. And on any subsequent playthroughs of the game, anytime you die, you'll be met with a fairly ominous message from, well, who I assume to be, you know, this. So all in all, the game is fairly simplistic. And a bit shit. Yeah, it's barely bare bones all things considered, the gameplay and visuals are barely there, the only real redeeming quality about this thing is the soundtrack. It is fairly short of course, but features some colourful chiptune bangers that hit that fairly general adventurous tone pretty bang on. But I do think context is important here. This wasn't anything that was dropped on fans after weeks or even months of anticipation. This was, at the very least, just something to tide people over for the main game, and I think it works well as just that, filler content for those itching for something after nearly a year's wait. It has its moments, but it's really not something I consider revisiting. It just isn't really all there in the grand scheme of things. So hey, good thing a sequel that improves on essentially every aspect of its predecessor exists, huh? POPGOES 2: The Dead Forest. This was a canned sequel to the original POPGOES, however, it didn't go without its own teaser game, POPGOES Arcade 2. It's genuinely a massive improvement in every department. For starters, visually things have definitely seen an upgrade. The first game had to deal with essentially what was a recreation of the style of those minigames from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, which worked fine for a minute-long post-night segment, but stretched out across an hour-long romp, it's not the most appealing aesthetic. Here things are significantly upgraded. While that similar style is retained, it's far more fleshed out here. The environments are colourful and appropriately detailed, as are the enemies you'll fight against. There's a certain level of visual appeal here that just wasn't present in Arcade, you know, of course taking into consideration that red sign split shade across the game screen. I don't know how anyone wrote shaders in a program as ancient as Collecting Fusion, so that alone is pretty cool. The environment that's being emulated here too, playing on some old busted ass arcade cabinet and Fazbear Freds. I like the change of scenery here, it's definitely refreshing, as is that extra level of polish here in the exterior that Arcade lacked on a little. So diving into the game itself, Fazbear World, the Phantom Scourge. Probably totally mispronounced that. Just like Arcade, Arcade 2 is a small-scale RPG, but this time actually qualifies for something more significant than this. These are both technically still teaser games, but one of the two is significantly more teaser than game, which is why I'm happy to announce that Arcade 2 does a far better job at delivering just a fun time. The premise is fairly simple again. In Fazbear World, I guess, the leaders of each area have caught some kind of virus, believed to have originated from a dark curse on the puppets, the Lord of Fazbear World. You have opted to help out the residents of the world, readying up to make your way through each area, find the king or queen of said area, and, as it's put, essentially punch the curse out of them. In response to this, Freddy Fazbear has asked the residents of each area to initiate a fight with you, training you up for the final bout with the puppets. You'll begin your journey in Fazbear Forest. Here you'll fight in some predetermined battles against several iterations of Freddy. Classic Freddy Fazbear, Toy Freddy, and Golden Freddy. Not unlike the first game, you'll run into a few random encounters too, with the phantom or ghost variants of the enemies you encounter in any given area, accompanied by splash text discouraging you from continuing. You shouldn't be doing this. We need to stop you. These apparitions clearly have some foresight the others don't. Or they just dumb, I don't know. The battle system has seen a bit of an upgrade, gone as the oversimplified, whatever this was. Here, in addition to your basic attack, you now have the options to guard and use an item. Guarding works fairly simply. When an enemy charges up an attack, indicating this by flashing white for a turn, you're given the option to stand guard to minimize damage taken. Item usage is nothing special. You'll be able to spend a turn using a consumable or a buff of some kind. That's really it. In concept, this stuff is nothing too crazy, but it at least makes this thing more of an RPG than POPGOES Arcade ever was. You won't be sitting idle waiting for attacks to just happen, that's for sure. Oh, and do the battle transitions remind anyone else of like some non-existent Earthbound PSI move? Totally ambiguous observation, just thought I'd mention it. Speaking of items, the shop has seen an improvement here too. Do you have any idea how hard it was to float down it with all these trees in the way? It's now run exclusively by Balloon Boy, with some running gag about how difficult it is for him to reach all these unconventional areas. I don't know, thought that was pretty good. In terms of new stuff, there's a bigger range of merchandise. I guess that's about it. You do now have the option to purchase attack and defense buffs, able to be equipped to last during battle until either one of you falls, as well as a shield that'll absorb any hits you get for 4 moves, in addition to now having access to a bit of variation in consumables, cupcake for a smaller health boost, pizza slice for moderate, and cake for a full restore, and upgradable overworld speed. Thank you. And yeah, you bet your ass I maxed that shit out as early on in the game as possible, I think from the pure anxiety that the overworld speed in Arcade gave me. You'll once again purchase items with coins collected from battles, no extra cash in the overworld this time around, which I think is fair. I don't know, seems like a bit of a pointless feature to me. So once you've defeated each essential enemy in an area, the ones the game will make you fight along a linear path, you'll finally be able to reach the ruler of that area. In Freddy Forest's case, this is King Freddy, who could have guessed. Then skip-it-up, you beat the ever-loving shit out of him, he'll thank you for saving him, and in reward for doing so, he'll grant you the Freddy mask. Oh right, that's another thing about this game. Okay, so the puppets, the game's final boss, is only able to be defeated with the 4 life masks to aid you. The Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy masks, which you'll receive for each boss you take out. These masks also serve an overworld purpose, allowing you to interact with the variants in the character the mask is based on for cash quiz questions of all things. Characters will ask you about the history of the Fazbear brand, essentially, inquiring about past restaurants, characters, any and all of that sort of thing. What gives these questions a bit of a twist, however, is the fact that, just like the POPGOES timeline, they only take into account the first 3 Freddy's games, as do the POPGOES arcade games themselves. For example, the answer to what colour is Fredbear's hat and bow tie, while that answer would be purple if we were going off the official Five Nights canon, the POPGOES timeline still doesn't involve any of the official Freddy's games that extend past FNAF 3, so based on one of the secret secret minigames from that game, the answer here is actually brown. This makes some of these questions fairly tough, and honestly the challenge is kind of fun, trying to imagine what some of these answers would be in this hypothetical where FNAF 4 and onwards never existed. However, it's not as straightforward as all the Bonnie variants exist within Bonnie Burrow, you know. While most of the character variants will reside in their respective area, you'll also interact with 2 themes characters from 2 of the other areas in the game, and an original cameo animatronic. Themes characters work like this. Each area, aside from Freddy Forest, will feature some kind of overarching motif. Artistry within Bonnie Burrow, a pirate theme within Foxy Coast, and Chica Meadow will feature a couple librarian characters. With that in mind, in Bonnie Burrow you'll run into Artist Freddy and Artist Foxy, Foxy Coast, Pirate Bonnie and Pirate Chica, that sort of deal. And sure enough, you're able to ask any of these special themed variant characters quiz questions if you approach them with the appropriate mask. Cameo animatronics, on the other hand, are more or less an entirely original concept in the original POPGOES canon, where it was explained in POPGOES through one of the phone calls that each Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location would feature its own unique cameo animatronic as an incentive to visit each franchise location, namely Lillie the Lamb, Koji the Coyote, and Owen the Owl. They'll act as mini-bosses of sorts. They're considerably weaker than any of the rulers, but they'll give you enough of a tough time that you'll want to make sure you're powerful enough to defeat them. So hey, once you defeat the majority of enemies in any given area, you do not gain immediate access to the king or queen. The only way you'll be able to access any area's ruler is by finding the key to the locked gate they're sitting behind. Now in the case of Freddy Forest, it's simple, it's on the opposite end of the map. But in regards to the remaining 3 areas, each respective key is hidden in another area. The Foxy key in Bonnie Burrow, the Chica key in Foxy Coast, and the Bonnie key in Chica Meadow. I suppose this is to encourage some variation in the gameplay structure, as once you defeat King Freddy and unlock access to the rest of the areas, you're free to pick and choose where you go. I suppose in the long run it doesn't make much of a difference, though it does just kind of feel like switching up the gameplay purely for the sake of it, unless I'm missing something super obvious here. Don't get me wrong though, this isn't anything that hampers the gameplay for me. In fact, maybe it's just purely for the variation, which just in itself can make things more interesting. Now with that being said, the idea of the game giving you total freedom on where you want to go first, there is still a difficulty curve here. It's nothing too complicated. Each ruler you defeat, the game increases in difficulty. In concept and in practice, this worked totally fine for me, but a potential exploit did cross my mind here. I haven't tested this at all, but if the difficulty only increases when you defeat a boss, would there be anything stopping you from going into one area, clearing the floor and moving on to another area without defeating that first area's boss, you know, as usual, but then going ahead and intentionally ignoring any of the rulers, keeping the game at an easier difficulty while leveling yourself up to make knocking out that last area's enemies a breeze? Don't know if this would even make much of a difference to the experience or nothing, as like I mentioned, you'll go without any kind of difficulty increase without clearing 2 or 3 areas anyway, but hey, whatever, shut up, the game's pretty good for what it is. I'll criticize a hypothetical all I want. So once you've taken out each king and queen, pacifying any remaining NPCs you didn't fight beforehand, you'll finally be able to enter this button-shaped portal and face off against the puppets after traversing stretches of purple paths, looming over a void, caked in the very ooze that somehow seems to be associated with the curse that brought about anguish in this world in the first place. Once you reach him, not unlike King Cultivate from POPGOES Arcade, he'll belittle you. It's soothing to know you're only here because of your companions. You're not here because you're stronger, you're here because you're lucky. Yeah, these guys don't hold back, huh? But that's kind of an interesting point, right? Traditional RPGs happening upon some crazy whack scenario that lays out the foundation for your adventure, it sure is often a case of luck most of the time, and every piece of the puzzle has to fit together in a certain way for you to reach the end of your journey. You know, video games. And sure, suspension of disbelief, but man's really out here spitting truth bombs, huh? But what is this, a critique of a common video game trope in my sequel to an RPG spin-off interactive teaser chronologically preceding the Five Nights at Freddy's Fangame was based on? Get out of here. So yeah, Lord Puppet, we finally get to see these life masks getting put to use in battle, and well, it's nothing too crazy. In trade of the crude basic attack, here the puppet has his own set of 4 masks, and instead of attacking just once, each turn he'll rapidly flash any one of the masks, corresponding to the mask you'll need to be wearing in order to minimize damage taken when he strikes. I gotta say, this was a fairly brutal fight, with this dude starting off with an initial whopping 750 HP and 30 attack power. And while I do love it when games do this sort of thing, squeezing multiple uses out of one mechanic to be used in multiple gameplay scenarios, I feel like a little more could have been done with the masks. While it's an improvement over the game's standard battle system, it's ultimately nothing more than a game as Simon Says. But contextually, I don't want to make this out to be any bigger of a deal than it actually is, you know. It works well enough as it stands for what it is. So once you obliterate this guy into absolute paste, he'll thank you profusely. Thank you JJ for defeating the Phantom Scourge. That's pretty neat. POPGOES interpreting a Myth of Freddy's 2 Easter egg as the playable character of the teaser game preceding what would have been POPGOES 2. I believe to the point of making her at least a somewhat significant character in the game, or at least in the general POPGOES canon to some extent. Yeah, so that's POPGOES Arcade 2. Yeah, there's a secret ending to this thing. It's a Five Nights at Freddy's Fangame spin-off. Whatever. So begin the game as usual, knock out the bear bitches, send King Freddy to the moon, slip past the portal here, and here you'll find a secret area, with Shadow Freddy facing away from you. Congratulations, you found me. This encounter can act as personal proof that I exist. And this mask can act as yours. You have a mission now. Complete it, and meet me back here. The mission in question is essentially a fetch quest where you'll be tasked with hunting down a series of hidden cupcakes. The Shadow Freddy mask, aside from acting as a substitute for the Freddy mask, is what's going to allow you to find these things, as once it's equipped, well, they're quite literally hidden in plain sight. This concept is actually very similar to Night 3's hidden task in Five Nights at Freddy's 3 that'll require you to click around the cameras, hunting for grey cupcakes. This could be a coincidence, but judging by POPGOES' strong connections to Freddy's 3, I'd assume that this was intentional. It's really as straightforward as that, and a piece of cake to work towards. Just keep the Shadow Freddy mask equipped at all times, and you will run into each and every cupcake. Maybe even a little too easily. The fifth and final cupcake is hidden in the puppet's abode. Once you enter the portal and search around a bit, you'll find a golden cupcake in no time, marking the end of your mission. Returning to the room you met Shadow Freddy in and placing down the first 4 cupcakes will open the room up into a hallway, taking you through a series of pieces of dialogue detailing the rumors of the Purple Man, his motives, the results. And this seems to all be taken from his own point of view, capping off his speech after you place down the golden cupcake with, "You can't say the results don't speak for themselves. Look at me. Do you see what I've turned into?" Oh damn, I wonder what he turned into. Oh, sick. Now in concepts, this is a very cool moment with some very appropriate writing that does a good job of building up what this entire second playthrough has led up to. For whatever reason though, I feel like the Springtrap jump scare just wasn't as effective as the subtle hand grab move in POPGOES Arcade. Not only would this be most people's second time round experiencing a setup and execution like this for a secret ending scare, I don't know, I feel like subtlety is more effective for something like this, especially as I'd guess most people will figure out that it's the purple guy speaking before the reveal. That, you know, kind of diminishes the surprise. Anyway, the game will crash after this, and opening it back up brings us to a short cutscene featuring screens with what look to be documents of some sort, only for the camera to be pulled back to Simon Fitzgerald's robot replica chained up against a wall. This is Fritz Glade's office. So yeah, that was POPGOES Arcade 2. I definitely consider this thing an improvement over the original, and that's not to say it isn't between a genuinely cool little RPG and a teaser for something far larger in scale. Oh, and also, yeah, that's a thing that happens sometimes, don't worry about it. Yeah, if I gotta get caught so off guard by this dick eater, you do too. At total random, it's entirely possible for this Shadow Bonnie sprite to stop your game in its tracks, only to flip to a text concerning disappearances, appearances of the purple guy, and other info screens of a similar tone, perfectly matching those in that cliffhanger cutscene. I'll admit that I did play this game when it first released, but this totally slips my mind that this was even a thing that could happen. It's really rather cool. Unless you forget to save because it will crash your game afterwards. Yeah, I wasn't too big of a fan of that. I did have to redo quite a bit of progress on the off chance I'd run into this guy, though one of those times it was kind of my fault. Yeah, this stupid idiot got stuck during one of the encounters and wasn't going for me. I exited the frame and, well, yeah, what was I expecting? Of course, this is all an extension of the purple guy, or in POPGOES' case, Simon Fitzgerald's doings, documents surrounding the aftermath of the storm he began. And while there isn't much else in terms of Easter eggs pertaining to the dude, you will in fact occasionally spot Find Simon underneath the game over screen in place of a tip. So, for real, that was POPGOES Arcade 2, and you know, for what it offers, there's nothing I really have against any of it. I mean, I do have a couple minor nitpicks, like this letter E next to what looks like a fuel gauge of some kind. That's your inventory, which I didn't even know you could access until friggin' right before the final boss. Now, to be fair, it is explained in the controls in the main menu, so that's probably just my stupid ass fault for not recalling. Though, with that being said, something as simple as a mechanic as that couldn't have had to have implemented some basic prompts during gameplay to remind players, hey, this is a thing you can do. And with that being said, those were the POPGOES Arcade games. Did they stack up nicely today? No and yes. Arcade has its moments, but ultimately just isn't an experience I feel too drawn back to, especially as someone with prior knowledge of the story. The most you'll get out of this is a couple nose exhales if you're lucky. There just isn't a lot here that's interesting enough to want to delve too deep into, and while that may have been the intention for it to have been nothing more than an interactive teaser, it serves that purpose, but I can't say it did anything more for me than that. Arcade 2 is definitely an improvement, I'd argue, in nearly every department. Gameplay, visuals, variety, music, dude, I didn't even mention the music Arcade 2 has. It's all great stuff yet again, and there's a lot more of it, and hell, I've been playing most of it in the background of this review. These two games are, at their core, nothing more than interactive teasers, of varying quality, sure, but the fact that we received any extra free content designed for two already free full FNAF fan games is a testament to what some of the content creator community is willing to do for these passion projects just to entertain their fans. While I wouldn't recommend both these games, I'd say give POPGOES Arcade a look if you're interested in checking out some of the earlier POPGOES content for the sake of it, and, well, I'd argue POPGOES Arcade 2 is genuinely a fun romp if you want something light and simple to go out for an hour or two. But hey, forget all that, because holy shit, does POPGOES Arcade 2020 look insanely good, dude. Everything about this looks like such an improvement over either of these two games. In fact, I've heard nothing but good things about it, even from people who have in the past expressed nothing but distaste for the series. Yeah, do I even have to mention that I really want to check this thing out? So hey, what better way to follow up reviews of the original teaser games than with an in-depth look at a totally reimagined shot at the beginning of the POPGOES reboot.